Late 1953. The fighting in Indochina is about to enter its 7th year. The destruction and bloodshed continues to bite into soldiers and civilians on both sides alike. And the question on everyone's lips is, when, oh when, will we finally have peace? Well, they're about to get an answer. Today, the Indochina War ends. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost's Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War, the beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age, when we began to replicate our minds electronically, gained the power to end our very existence as a species, and discovered that we can truly reach for the stars. Last time, we covered a whole flurry of activity spanning several years. The Viet Minh swept across Route Coloniale 4, only for the French to pull a couple of big victories out of their hats in the Tonkin lowlands. New French Commander-in-Chief, Henri Navarre, thinks he has a good plan to coax the Viet Minh into another set-piece battle where he can tip the scales in France's favor once and for all, and he has picked Dien Bien Phu as his battlefield. So, without further ado, let's get into it, because we have a whole lot to cover today. The first French deployment to Dien Bien Phu gets underway November 20th, 1953. At 10:35 in the morning, some 60 C-47 and 12 C-119 transport planes take off, carrying the first of a force of 2,200 paratroopers, with B-26 invaders for escorts. The assault goes off smoothly, even though it takes a couple of trips. Brigadier General Jean Gilles is in command of the operation, and within hours, the French seize the valley from the small Viet Minh contingent stationed here. Casualties are light. So far, so good. No big counterattack comes right away, and the French get to work building a fortress in which to break the armies of the Viet Minh. Over the next 4 months, Dien Bien Phu transforms entirely. Engineers patch up and extend an airstrip so transport planes can pour in reinforcements, artillery, even American-made Chaffee tanks. The area is gradually developed into a fully fledged fortress built with dirt, logs, and sandbags. Brick and cement up here is a lot harder to come by, and bringing it in by air is a tough ask when so much of that transport capacity is needed for reinforcement and supply. Defending the airstrip, they've got 4 defensive strongpoints in a kind of 4-leaf clover shape, though it remains to be seen if that formation will bring them the luck they hope for. Those strongpoints are named Claudine, Huguette, Dominique, and Eliane. Guarding the western route, the strongpoint Anne-Marie. To the north, Beatrice and Gabrielle, and to the south, Isabelle. Isabelle, however, is a bit too far away from the rest of the fortress to support it or be supported by it, so that could maybe be an issue one day. Isabelle does have just about the best defenders it could ask for, though, being manned by the Foreign Legion's 13th Demi Brigade, which is split between there and strongpoint Beatrice. Elsewhere, you've got the 3rd Thai Battalion, made up of locally recruited soldiers holding Anne-Marie, and the 5th Battalion of the 7th Algerian Rifles holding Gabrielle. Okay, I'm not going to list every unit involved here, but what I'm getting at is that this is a very multi-ethnic and multinational force. About a third are Vietnamese loyalists, a fifth hail from Africa, the rest are a mix of native French and multinational Foreign Legion troops. Altogether, this will add up to about 12,000 personnel by the beginning of March 1954. Christian de Castries runs the show here in overall command of the forces in the fortress. Under him, you've got Pierre Langlais and Marcel Bigard, top-notch paratroop commanders, and Charles Perrault in charge of the big guns. Let's take a look at who they are facing and their reaction to the French buildup here, because they are, as it happens, acutely aware of what's going on. When the French first drop into Dien Bien Phu, Viet Minh commander Nguyên Giáp isn't expecting it. In fact, he's off in the Viet Bac region presenting his own plans to his divisional commanders when the news comes through. It raises more than a few questions, and it threatens the Viet Minh forces operating in the west of the country. Giáp gets straight to work gathering intelligence, sending out recon to the area, and assigning radio intercept teams to figure out what the French are up to. It isn't long before he gets the intelligence he's after, and Giáp begins to understand the French move as an opportunity not necessarily as a threat. In fact, this plays quite nicely into his own envisioned endgame for the war. The DRV's intelligence services had acquired a good understanding of the basic elements of the Navarre plan. This allowed the Vietnamese Politburo to better devise its own strategy. Because Navarre was massing his forces to occupy and hold the Tonkin lowlands, the Politburo decided, we will force him to disperse his forces out to other sectors so that we can annihilate them. Thinking that his opponents were bent on taking Laos, Navarre decided to commit troops to Dien Bien Phu, on the main route to Laos, to stop them from moving westwards. But Laos was never the DRV's goal. Diversion was. And it worked. On December 6, 1953, the Politburo makes the call. They accept Henri Navarre's challenge to battle. They will march on Dien Bien Phu. Instructions from Viet Minh leader Ho Chi Minh are simple. If victory is certain, attack. If not, then you must refrain. Divisional commanders and Chinese observers agree. The date of the assault is set for January 25th, 1954. Giap knows what the French are trying to do, and that they are building up force, and he means to swiftly attack and annihilate the fort in one blow before they can be fully dug in, not giving them the time to finalize a prepared defense as they have done in previous battles. However, as Giap's forces draw close to the valley, and he himself visits the front lines, he is filled with dread by what he sees. The French fortifications are basically finished. They've been too slow. French Commander Castries is not going to be caught by surprise. By now, too, delays have shifted the assault date back one day. So on January 25th, at the exact time his forces were originally to get going, Giap makes what he will later call the most difficult decision of his military career. He cancels the attack. He's not going to retreat though, but it is very much back to the drawing board. See, he thinks there may well be something else he can use, something the French have not only disregarded, but actually staked their own victory on. The French strategy hinges on the belief that the Viet Minh do not have any significant anti-air capacity. Henri Navarre believes that he can exploit this to its fullest and emulate his predecessors Raoul Salan and Jean de Lattre de Tassigny by drawing the Viet Minh into a set battle and then blowing them away with air power and artillery, as de Tassigny did at Viet Minh and Salan did at Nha San, which we touched on last time. This reasoning has actually guided the shape of the Dien Bien Phu fort heavily. See, the French chose to set their forts within a valley, shielded by the hills, rather than atop them. The thinking here is that the forts are too far away from the hills for light artillery up there to hit them, and anything heavier that the Viet Minh try to bring up the hills will be a sitting duck for the French planes. So this will force Giap to deploy his guns directly into the valley alongside his infantry. Then, as before, the French can pound away with cannons and bombs until their enemy breaks. The wounded can also be flown out easily, reinforcements and resupply flown in, and the Viet Minh will find themselves powerless to do anything to stop it. A good plan in theory, one that really maximizes the French advantages in equipment, and it could end up being sort of a masterstroke by the French if it pays off. There is one teensy little issue with it though, which could be a problem. You see, the Viet Minh do have anti-air capability, quite a lot of anti-air capability. Over 100 anti-air pieces in total, including 80 Soviet-made 37mm guns and plenty of 50 caliber machine guns with decent AA potential. If deployed correctly, these guns may transform the fortress of Dien Bien Phu into a prison for the French, no longer a bulwark keeping the Viet Minh out, but a trap of their own making. Giap was told before to only attack if victory is certain. Well, now he intends to grind down the French until that victory is certain, day by day, and inch by bloody inch. And how are the Viet Minh planning to supply a protracted siege? Well, this is where I want to take a few minutes to talk about something which has been crucial to the Viet Minh's success for the entire war, which I haven't really mentioned until now: the mass mobilization of civilians for logistical purposes. Supplying a regular army in Vietnam is difficult enough for the French, with all of their ships, planes, and trucks. And that's all the more difficult for their adversaries. The Viet Minh have some trucks now, sure, mostly courtesy of China, but they make less of a difference than you might think. Roads and bridges still need to be kept open and workable as they always have. This is the job of what Ho Chi Minh calls the fighter laborers, ordinary Vietnamese civilians working day and night to keep rice and ammunition flowing to the front lines. In total, since 1950, around 1.75 million fighter laborers have been called up, working to the tune of some 50 million workdays. About half of these are women, and this civilian force manages to repair 3,670 kilometers of road and construct over 500 kilometers of new roads between 1950 and 1954, and rebuild or improve 47 kilometers of bridges. The French Air Force spends countless hours planning and executing operations to bomb and block key roads in prime locations, only for recon planes to find the rubble cleared and the road reopened within hours. The impending battle at Dien Bien Phu is no different, and the Viet Minh mobilized over 250,000 civilians to supply it. But here, they're going to play a major tactical role as well as a logistical one. As for those hills, which the French think are going to force the communists into a slugfest in the narrow confines of the valley, Giap speaks to an attached Chinese observer and advisor, Wei Guoxing, and the two agree that the only way to destroy the French fortress is to get their big guns on those hills and defend them from the French counter-battery artillery and airstrikes. The orders are given to Tran Dang Ninh, head of the party's general supply office, to get it done. Dugouts and firing positions are carved into the sides of these hills by the fighter-laborer workforce, set in positions where their guns could easily fire directly down into the valley, while also being easy to pull back to safety when the French return fire. Big guns are then dismantled and dragged up to their positions piece by piece by the army of laborers. Henri Navarre himself will later describe the setup. All around our positions, the enemy had created a network of camouflaged paths which permitted the transport of ammunition. The guns had been brought forward dismantled, carried by men to emplacements where they had direct observation of their targets. They were installed in shell-proof dugouts and fired point-blank from portholes, or were pulled out by their crews and pulled back as soon as our counter-battery fire began. Each piece or group of pieces was covered by massed anti-aircraft artillery put into position and camouflaged in the same manner as the guns. This way of using the artillery and AA guns was possible only with the human anthill at the disposal of the Viet Minh, and was to make shambles of all the estimates of our own artillerymen. Their forces now in place, the siege begins. Over the weeks following Giap's cancelled attack, his forces have slowly dug their way closer to the French lines, one trench at a time. Now they find themselves within 200 meters of strongpoint Beatrice, and that is where the battle begins. On March 13th comes the attack, and artillery rains down on the French defenders, collapsing trenches and tunnels and burying some French troops alive, while the French artillery proves entirely incapable of stopping the barrage. At 5:10 that afternoon, 2 regiments of the Vietnamese 312th Division go over the top and storm Beatrice, which, as I said earlier, is held by elements of the French Foreign Legion 13th Demi Brigade. The quality of the defenders makes no meaningful difference though, and by midnight the communists have taken the position. The commander of strongpoint Beatrice, his entire command staff, and Colonel Jules Gaucher, commander of the 13th Demi Brigade, are all killed in action. Strongpoints Anne-Marie and Gabrielle are also coming under heavy shelling and infantry assaults. Log bunkers and earthworks implode under artillery fire, proving to be death traps rather than foxholes for the French defenders. A French counterattack, including paratroopers and tanks, manages to delay the fall of Gabrielle, but only by hours. The bombardment has been so intense that the entire top layer of soil at Gabrielle has been ground down into a fine dust. There is nothing left here to hold. The area is in communist hands by the night of the 15th. To be sure, the French are making their attackers pay for their success, inflicting roughly twice as many losses as they're taking. But the Viet Minh have the men to spare. Between the 308th, 312th, 316th, and 351st Divisions, which have all been committed, Giap has around 50,000 troops available to him here. What's more, any hope the French might have of rushing in reinforcements is being quickly dashed. When they're not hammering the French fortifications into dust, the Viet Minh artillery is pounding the airstrip, dotting it with craters and rubble and rendering it unusable. French planes try and fail to silence the artillery, being greeted instead by a hail of anti-aircraft fire, which forces them to back off. In total, about 50 planes will be destroyed and 150 will be damaged over the course of the battle. Charles Péroute, French artillery commander, who boasted of the superiority of his guns in the lead up to the battle, now fully realizes the situation they're in. Helpless and outmatched, Péroute decides to make an early exit rather than continue alongside his men until he is exited by the enemy. He takes his own life the night of March 16th. Anne-Marie falls the next day. We then see a relative lull in the fighting. The outer ring of strongpoints taken, the communists now slowly come closer and closer to the main body of fortifications in the center. By now, the French defenders are reliant entirely on airdrops. Planes are no longer able to properly land. AA fire forces them to drop their payloads from high altitudes, meaning that many drops drift into Viet Minh territory on the way down, leaving the defenders short of ammunition and food. On March 30th, Giap is ready to reignite the assault, and the scene descends into bloody, daily fighting for the next month. 25,000 more communist troops are called up to help Giap's forces absorb the mounting losses. Strongpoint Isabelle to the south is left bottled up, penned in, but not under active assault. Giap means to clear out Dien Bien Phu itself first. By early May, he believes he has worn down the French defenders enough that success is certain. French positions by now are falling left and right, sometimes only being able to muster dozens to hold the line against thousands of attackers. Giap orders his men to begin the final assault on May 6, comprising the entire 308th, 312th, and 316th divisions. 100 guns open up on the remaining French positions, and mines are detonated beneath them in tunnels dug out by communist troops. By the following morning, the entire defense system is collapsing, and Viet Minh troops are swarming all over the central command areas. French Commander de Castries is well aware that this is the end, and he radios General René Cogny, commander of French forces in Tonkin, and informs him the battle is over and his men have no strength left to attempt a breakout. Here is what is said next. Cogny now insisted there be no capitulation. Mon vieux, of course you have to finish the whole thing now. But what you have done until now surely is magnificent. Don't spoil it by hoisting the white flag. You are going to be submerged by the enemy, but no surrender, no white flag. All right, mon général. I only wanted to preserve the wounded, de Castries replied, his voice calm and collected. Yes, I know. Well, do the best you can, leaving it to your subordinate units to act for themselves. What you have done is too magnificent to do such a thing. You understand, mon vieux? There was a silence. Then de Castries bade his farewell. Bien, mon général. Well, goodbye, mon vieux, said Cogny. I'll see you soon. De Castries is taken prisoner less than an hour later, and by mid-afternoon, Dien Bien Phu has fallen. The last French troops at strongpoint Isabelle to the south attempt to break out, but are almost annihilated in the process, Isabelle falling later that evening. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu is over. Less than 200 defenders find their way out of the valley with their freedom. The rest are either dead or taken prisoner. Viet Minh casualties number in the tens of thousands, but Giap has gotten the victory he so desperately craved. Armistice talks are actually already underway at this point in Geneva, Switzerland, attended by delegates from Ho Chi Minh's Democratic Republic of Vietnam, the French-aligned state of Vietnam to the south, Laos, Cambodia, France, Britain, the USA, the USSR, and Mao Zedong's Communist China. In reality, of course, the independence of Communist Vietnam is basically already decided and out of French hands. And victory at Dien Bien Phu only cements this. In fact, a big reason why the Viet Minh are not more demanding in their terms is pressure from the Soviet Union and China. They both fear that a total victory for Ho Chi Minh in Indochina might prompt the USA to take action. A declaration is agreed and signed on July 21st, effectively ending the Indochina War. Vietnam, for now, will remain split in two, a communist north and a French alliance south. Indochina in general will become a neutral zone, with both Vietnams, Laos, and Cambodia forbidden from hosting foreign military bases. Finally, a cross-border election involving both Vietnams as a road to reunification is mandated within 2 years. That might prove tricky, as the South Vietnamese actually refuse to sign the accord. So do the Americans, though they do sign a unilateral declaration acknowledging the ceasefire and pledging not to use force to disturb it. So, other than these minor setbacks, which I'm sure will be resolved in due course, we have reached the end of our story. There's a whole lot of uncertainty in the months and years ahead for Vietnam, and what this hard-fought peace might look like. The one thing I can say with relative certainty, though, is that the brutal years of war leading up to this moment are finally over. Probably over. Well, maybe over. Right? Over. Huh? Well, this has been a really interesting conflict to cover, and a lesser known one at that, which makes it all the more interesting for us to research and write. And we hope it's as fascinating for you guys to hear about. Help us keep the lights on by joining the TimeGhost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com/timeghosthistory, and we'll be keeping our eye on Vietnam. If anything unexpected happens down there, well, that seems unlikely, you'll be the first to know. TimeGhost Army member of the week for this channel is Robert Block. Remember to hit that subscribe button, because you know you wanna, and I'll see you next time.